Approaching the ancient city of Halicarnassus, there is a magnificent building that dominates the view. This elaborate and huge monument stood there for many centuries, serving as the resting place of a noble couple who wished to have the largest and most elegant tomb of the world. This is the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus, where King Mausolus and his wife and sister, Artemisia II, were buried. Situated in the southern western coast of modern-day Turkey, in the city that is now called Bodrum, this tomb was so famous that the word used for it, Mausoleum, started to be used as the default name for any large tomb to this day. Such was the renown of this building that it was listed as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. So let's take a look at some of the things that made it so special through the lens of Civilization VI. In Civilization VI, the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus provides the following bonuses: +1 science, faith and culture on all coastal tiles in the city, and all great engineers receive an additional charge. I am not going to lie, this was a tough one. Just by looking at the effects that the Mausoleum provides in the various games of the series, you can tell that it's a bit all over the place. But I think I managed to make some connections that at least make a bit of sense, even if I personally don't find them as satisfying as most of the wonders in the series so far. You'll see what I mean shortly, but to get to that, we first need to take a look at the story of Mausolus and Artemisia to find out why the Mausoleum was even built in the first place. Mausolus ruled Caria as a satrap, basically an autonomous regional governor, under the Achaemenid Persian Empire, from around 377 to 353 BC. One of his first decisions was to move the capital of his kingdom from Mylassa to Halicarnassus, so that it could be on the coast. Mausolus spent his entire reign transforming Halicarnassus into one of the most impressive cities of the Greek world. I say the Greek world here because Mausolus is kind of an interesting figure in that regard. His political allegiances clearly lay with Persia, but as far as his cultural tastes went, he was very much fascinated by Greek artists and architects, as well as the Hellenistic traditions and culture in general. In that way, Mausolus's Caria was a kingdom where 2 of the ancient world's most powerful cultural traditions met and blended, with Halicarnassus being the crowning jewel of that fusion. Mausolus, member of the Hecatomnid dynasty, ordered the construction of walls, theatres, and a temple dedicated to the Greek god of war Ares. He also ordered the erection of a massive monument that would also serve as his tomb after his death. The tomb really was massive, and its construction finished after Mausolus' death during the reign of Artemisia II. Artemisia was the sister and wife, let's not think about that too much, of Mausolus, and wanted the monument to be the grandest of its kind, hiring the greatest artists and architects of the era to work on it. She was also entombed in it, alongside her brother, having ruled for just 2 years before dying of grief. The building came to be known as the Mausoleum, named after Mausolus, and it was so lavish that it was listed among the 7 wonders of the ancient world, as well as lending its name to every large tomb to this day. Speaking of the construction of the Mausoleum, I think this is as good a time as any to tackle the first effect of the wandering game, probably the most appropriate of the set. In Civ VI, the Mausoleum grants all great engineers an extra charge. I believe this is a reference to the fact that multiple talented architects and sculptors worked to design and construct the Mausoleum, at the request of Artemisia. The tomb was designed by the Greek architects Satyros of Paros and Pythius of Priene. The sculptors who made the large statues that decorated the monument were Leocharis, Priaxis, Timotheus, and Skopas, who also had supervised the rebuilding of the Temple of Artemis. As you can probably tell, hiring such a large amount of talented artists for the construction of a royal tomb was not the most usual thing, and it shows how committed Artemisia was to honor the memory of her brother. In any case, the result spoke for itself, combining architectural elements from different cultures like Greek, Persian, and Lycian, into something with no real precedent. Ancient sources describe it as covered in white marble and topped with a pyramid, crowned by a quadriga, a 4-horse chariot sculpture presumably depicting Mausolus himself. The whole monument was immediately recognized for its grandeur, and visitors from all across the ancient world would travel there to see it. I think that the bonus regarding the great engineers could be seen as a way to reference the fact that this ancient wonder was a result of a collaborative effort made by so many different and talented people of the time. Now, as far as the second effect goes, I can only assume that it's a reference to the city of Halicarnassus itself, and I have to admit that I find it a bit generic for my liking. As mentioned earlier, Mausolus was really determined when it comes to turning Halicarnassus into a cosmopolitan cultural center. The city had already claimed a spot in the annals of history as the birthplace of Herodotus, known as the father of history, and the construction of the Mausoleum sealed the deal when it comes to the cultural importance of Halicarnassus. As far as the science and faith bonuses, I couldn't find anything very concrete and specific to tie them to. Maybe the faith bonus could be a reference to the Temple of Ares that I mentioned earlier, but I highly doubt it. It may also reflect the religious role that the Mausoleum acquired after Mausolus' death, possibly functioning as a site of hero cult worship. The bonus itself being given to just the coastal tiles is also a bit weird, and I can only assume that it's because Halicarnassus was a coastal city, a very important factor for its development. But as I said, I couldn't pinpoint anything specific about the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus that would warrant these bonuses. Looking at how other games in the series implemented the wonder, they seem a bit all over the place. I will say that my favorite version is the one in Civ VII, that makes your cavalry units respawn after being destroyed. I think that's a nice nod to the wonder being a tomb. The wonder requires the defensive tactic Civic. I believe this is possibly the most random requirement in the series so far. I have only two possible explanations for this, and I don't particularly like either of them, to be honest. The first explanation stems from the fact that Mausolus was the ruler who ordered the construction of the walls of Halicarnassus. These walls were specifically built to be able to withstand attacks from the recently invented catapults, and you can still see the remnants today. The second explanation results from the final fate of the Mausoleum. Centuries after the wonder was knocked down by a series of earthquakes, a lot of its fallen stones were used by the Knights of St. John of Rhodes to build the Bodrum Castle, which still stands to this day. So you could argue that the eventual fate of the wonder was to be used as a defensive fortress, but it's definitely a big reach. Well, this unlock requirement definitely ranks pretty low compared to the rest of the ones we've seen so far in the series, but they can't all be perfect. The wonder must be built adjacent to a harbour. Halicarnassus was, first and foremost, a harbour city. Mausolus moved his capital there precisely because of its coastal position, and the city's prosperity was built on maritime trade and naval power. The mausoleum itself was constructed in a hill that overlooked the city, and would have most likely been the first thing that would be visible when approaching the city from the sea. So the harbour requirement just makes sense.
A vast tomb lies over me in Halicarnassus, of such dimensions, of such exquisite beauty, as no other shade can boast.
The in-game quote comes from Lucian of Samosata, a Syrian satirist and rhetorician of the 2nd century AD, and is of his work Dialogues of the Dead, in which the dead speak from the underworld. In the passage that the game chooses, Mausolus is basically bragging about his monumental tomb. What is interesting about this quote is that its tone changes drastically when placed in context. In the work, Mausolus is arguing with Diogenes. Everybody who knows the basic things about Diogenes knows that this conversation would not be in Mausolus' favour. Well, Diogenes claims that for all of Mausolus' accomplishments, and in spite of his extravagant tomb, in the end, they're both just piles of bones. It's just that the bones of Mausolus carry more weight on them, what with all the marble on top. I would like to go over the entire conversation in the video, but it would be too long. Instead, I have linked a translation of it in the description, and I highly recommend giving it a read. As briefly mentioned in the required Civic segment, the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus survived for over 15 centuries before a series of earthquakes between the 11th and 15th centuries gradually destroyed it. By the time the Knights of St. John arrived in the area, in the early 15th century, much of it had already fallen. The Knights used the remaining stone and marble to build the castle of Bodrum, which you can still visit on the same coastline today. Some of the sculptural fragments were incorporated directly into the castle walls, where a handful of them remained until being taken to the British Museum in the 19th century. The site of the mausoleum itself is now an archaeological park in the center of modern Bodrum, where the foundations and some remaining stonework can still be visited. As you have probably gathered, I am not the biggest fan of how the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus was translated into Civilization VI. Most of its features just feel a bit generic, with certain ones, like the defensive tactic Civic, barely being connected to it. But I can understand that translating a monumental tomb into compelling gameplay mechanics is not the easiest design challenge, something that is pretty obvious when looking at the various other effects that have been given to the Wonder in the rest of the series. I do find the Great Engineering bonus very appropriate though, and if we just focus on that, the significance of the Mausoleum as an architectural achievement that was admired for centuries becomes more clear.